Welcome to the Jukebox Podcast from WP Tavern. My name is Nathan Wrigley. Jukebox is a podcast which is dedicated to all things WordPress. The people, the events, the plugins, the blocks, the themes, and in this case, how WordPress can be the backbone of a profitable newsletter. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, you can do that by searching for WP Tavern in your podcast player of choice, or by going to wptavern.com/feed/podcast. And you can copy that URL into most podcast players. If you have a topic that you'd like us to share on the podcast, I'm keen to hear from you and hopefully get you or your idea featured on the show. Head over to wptavern.com/contact/jukebox and use the contact form there. So on the podcast today, we have Laura Nelson. Laura is a content marketer at WooCommerce, where she's responsible for creating and planning engaging content for their users. Prior to WooCommerce, she worked at MailPoet, an email marketing plugin for WordPress, and before that, she worked at Pragmatic, a UK-based WordPress agency. She's on the show to explore her experience of how you can, and why you might want to, set up a paid email newsletter. When I hear the word newsletter, I'm typically thinking about the information which drops into your inbox on a daily basis. We've all surrendered our email addresses in return for some product or service. We agree to receive emails on the understanding that we can unsubscribe at some point. Perhaps a few of these emails really resonate with you, but it's likely that you unsubscribed from many as the content was no longer wanted. This kind of email marketing is not always viewed favourably, and is not the kind of technique that Laura is talking about on the podcast today. Her pitch is that email newsletters can themselves be a product, that people will pay to receive your emails, and she's got data and examples to back it up. I suppose that the closest analogy would be people who create an online course. You have an area of expertise. You do the hard work of creating the course, and people will pay for a membership to have the benefit of learning from your expertise. Laura is describing something similar to that. The only difference being that instead of a course, people will pay to receive your emails, knowing that you're going to bring value to them regularly. I know that this can be done because, as you will hear, I'm a subscriber to some of the emails which Laura mentioned. This is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's hard work, and you've got to cultivate your audience and give them something of value, repeatedly. Typically, when we record the podcast, there's not a lot of background noise, but that's not always the case with these WordCamp Europe interviews. We were competing against crowds and the air conditioning, and whilst the podcasts are more than listenable, I hope that you understand that the vagaries of the real world were at play. One last thing to mention is that I'll be attending WordCamp US next week, and as a result, there won't be a podcast episode. If you're going to be there, I do hope that our paths cross. If you're interested in finding out more about the podcast, you can find all the links in the show notes by heading to wptavern.com/podcast, and you'll find all the other episodes there as well. And so, without further delay, I bring you Laura Nelson. I am joined on the podcast by Laura Nelson. Hello.
Hello.
Laura did a talk yesterday.
Afternoon, yeah. So I'm feeling pretty good today.
You're feeling happy. Yeah, she did a talk at WordCamp Europe 2022. What was it entitled? What was it about?
It was how to create a paid newsletter subscription in WordPress.
Okay. And did it go well?
I think so.
So we're going to be talking today about newsletters. Obviously, newsletters, they do seem to be all the rage.
Yeah, every so often you hear like email is dead. It's all about TikTok. And in fairness, it is all about TikTok at the moment. But email marketing is an amazing way to speak to your customers or your audience.
Does the data back that up then? Reliably over the last 20 years, we can say email still works.
Yeah. And conversion rates are far higher from email marketing than they are from like if you tweet about your products or your services. email marketing is golden in terms of conversion rates.
That's interesting. Just the interface is a little bit more, how to describe it? TikTok's a bit more ephemeral. There's a lot going on and there's a lot making you wish to scroll past all of the things.
Yeah.
I think it's the only thing that's been with me for 20 years.
Exactly. People are familiar with it. They know how it works. They know what to expect from an email. I think you're capturing people at a good time because generally they're not going to open their emails unless they have time to read your email. Whereas if you're like on Twitter and you're like idly scrolling or you've got like 2 minutes, it forces them to stop, but they might have time to take that information in. So email is nice. It sits there. If you don't have time to read it properly when you first open it, you can come back to it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was just thinking about that. And if I don't log into Twitter for a few days, there's almost no chance that I'm going to see the things from 3 days ago because I'm going to start at the top. Yeah, that's a really good point. So when you're talking about newsletters, presumably we're talking about a piece where people have subscribed to a newsletter and you are then offering content to them. Is that basically the model?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. And you're talking about getting paid and generating revenue, and it almost sounds like it's too good to be true. You throw together a newsletter and suddenly you become incredibly wealthy. Of course, that's not the case. There's probably a lot of hard work. There's probably a lot of expertise required. Is that true?
Yes. I'd say the hardest part of this is building your list. So if you don't already have people in your community or your audience available, you probably have to put more effort into marketing. But in terms of expertise, you can write a newsletter about anything you want. The example I gave in my talk yesterday was a newsletter about cats. And that's an interest. I'm not an expert on cats. I just think cats are cute. And so you can use them in whatever ways you want. I definitely don't think you have to be an expert in a specific subject. If you're good at writing or if you have interesting or unusual opinions about things, you can easily make an email newsletter.
Before we pressed record, we talked about the fact that there is a rival platform, which I think by now probably most people have heard of. It's called Substack. And you likened what you were describing in the talk and probably what we're going to be talking about as a kind of an alternative to that.
Yes, that's right. Substack is huge now, and I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but there are millions of subscribers across all the Substack newsletters, I guess you'd call them. And the solution that I'm going to be talking to you about is an alternative to keep that in WordPress rather than outsourcing that to a different platform.
Is there a strong reason in your head why you would not wish to go with it's the SaaS versus WordPress argument. You could have this about 1,000 different SaaS platforms, but is there a strong reason in your head why you wish to do it in WordPress and not just pay Substack the fee and get on with it over there?
I think WordPress lends itself to content. Like WordPress is where you publish content, and we're talking about sharing content in a newsletter. And I think like this method, what most appeals about it to me is the fact that everything is in one place. And it's familiar. So if you already have a WordPress website or a business that's using WordPress to power it, then you don't have to learn something new. It's just there. It can be extended onto what you're already doing.
The payment bit, we'll probably unpick the payment puzzle, but is this basically a pay wall thing? In other words, are you restricting content? Are you only sending it out to people who've paid, or is it that you embed other things inside the newsletters, upsells and subscriptions that people might join and so on?
No, you're only sending the content to those who've paid. So it's like a subscription, like you would sign up to I think you can get for like dog and cat food where they get delivered regularly. And just like that. But instead you're receiving content in your inbox.
So you're going to describe to us a system built where you go to the website, you're engaged, you sign up, you begin receiving emails, and if your subscription payment is cancelled, the emails fail and it stops. And
that's exactly it.
Okay, so what plugins are you using?
Yeah, so in addition to being on a WordPress website, so disclaimer, if you're not on WordPress, I don't know why you're listening to it.
That's probably fair.
You'll need WooCommerce, MailPoet, which is an email marketing plugin for WordPress, and WooCommerce subscriptions.
So the basic WooCommerce to sort of bind the whole subscription thing together, you add the subscription thing on top.
Yeah.
And then there's MailPoet. Is there any cost to any of that?
Yeah, so WooCommerce subscriptions is $199 per year. MailPoet is free to use up to 1,000 subscribers. So when you get beyond that, there's tiered plans. But I think the lowest plan starts at around $12 or $15 per month. It's quite reasonable.
I've heard And I don't know where this number comes from, but I've heard that if your email list is 1,000 people, roughly you can become profitable. And what I mean by that is that you can become profitable enough for it to become an important part of what you do. And it always felt that that was like quite a low number. But then having tried to create email lists in the past, I quickly realized actually 1,000 is pretty hard to get to. It's difficult to get people to surrender their email address. So is there any advice that you give to people essentially to give you their email address?
Yeah, I think what works best is honesty. Be upfront and honest about what you're going to be sending to them, that you're not going to pass on their email to somebody else, when you're going to, like the frequency that they can expect to receive emails from you. And then it's just a case of making sure that the content that you're including in it is really valuable, offers something a bit different or unique that they might not be able to read elsewhere. I mean, that's like solid advice for if it's a paid newsletter or not paid. And then it's just another form of marketing. So I recommend including a link to sign up in all of your normal email signatures, like from your Gmail or whatever you use. Use your social networks. If you have a good community on Twitter, let them know about your newsletter. Basically, plug it everywhere that you possibly can.
Does the MailPoet solution, does it allow you to create, so forgive me, first of all, I've not used MailPoet, so I don't know how the UI works, but does it allow you to basically create a post in WordPress, which is then fired out as an email?
Yes and no. So if you mean like a post in WordPress that you'd be able to go onto a WordPress website and see it in like the blog section, it wouldn't work that way around. If you had published a blog post on WordPress and then used MailPoet to send an email, it's a tick, like a widget that you drag in and a tick box, and you can include that entire blog post in your email.
Okay, so you create a normal blog post, tick a box. When you click publish, it is converted to an email and sent out.
Yeah, or you drag it into like your email template and you can add other stuff around it.
Oh, okay, so you could put a different header and a different footer. And okay.
And in the case of the paid newsletter, though, you'd probably, in order to get people to sign up and pay for this, you don't want that content being available on your website for free. So you'd probably want to write the post within the email itself so it only lives there and not elsewhere.
Yes, that wouldn't make sense, would it, if it was a paid newsletter and the content was available on your website?
But you could use WooCommerce memberships. You could guard that and make it a private post and then link to it.
Okay, so as with all things WordPress, there's a way.
Yeah, you can add another layer to this if you want to do that.
If somebody was to begin a completely new website, they want to talk about, I don't know, volcanoes or something, then would you be able to do this on pretty modest hosting? Because it doesn't feel like there's a lot going on. Basic WordPress, basic WooCommerce, a couple of extra plugins, maybe really cheap hosting.
Oh yeah, really. Unless you're planning on adding loads of other products to your store or adding loads and loads of other content to your website, you can keep this really lean and get away with really cheap hosting. It wouldn't take much. You just need a product page, really.
The difficulty, I think, maybe is trying to get people to find your newsletter in the first place. And then, of course, there's the problem of getting them to separate their email and give it to you. Have you got any advice for how you market your newsletter? Anything around there?
Yeah, it's funny. Someone asked me this yesterday and after the talk, and I said I could probably do an entire other presentation on this exact topic.
Go deep, it's good.
So what I was saying earlier about being really upfront about what you're going to be sending, when you're going to be sending it, what you're doing with their email address. And you just really need to show some value. So you need to make sure that the content that you're creating is unique, or if you do have an expertise in a certain area, really let people know like why that's important to them. Content is all about problem solving for people. So you need to find out what problems people have. And if you can solve that in content, then let them know.
I'm guessing that some things are going to be more of a labour of love than other things. Again, if you're producing the volcano newsletter, I'm expecting in the low single digits, frankly.
It's a niche market, I imagine. Maybe that would be more successful because, you get people who are really into something like that. There's probably not a lot, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the volcano market, I'm not going to lie. But I kind of imagine there will be those niche areas like that where if there's not content being published about that or at least readily available to you, then you probably would pay. It's like, oh yeah, I love that and I'm really interested in that. So I would pay to receive.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, you've got to think about the person reading the content and whether volcanoes are going to be of any interest to them. But also, your ability to sustain this is directly related to how interested you think it is. So, if you genuinely have no interest in volcanoes and you embark on that mission, probably it's going to dry up fairly quickly. And so I wonder if often people in this chase the big thing, the big, shiny, exciting thing, only to discover, do you know what? Actually, on a deep personal level, I'm not interested in this. And the newsletter dries up and falters and fails.
If you're thinking about starting this up, you need to remember it's not just one email. It's not just two. It has to have longevity to it. So whatever it is, whatever topic you're choosing, obviously you can't possibly know what you might like to talk about or write about in 6 months' time. But you need to make sure that the topic is either big enough or is new things are happening in that area enough in order to sustain a long-term newsletter.
I wonder if this is a perfect extension to people who are already doing things. They might have got a YouTube channel, they might have a WordPress website and they're producing things, or in this case, here we are on a podcast. It may be that you've got that kind of thing. It feels like a bit of a no-brainer to just add this on as a kind of value add. So you could have, content that only subscribers get or things like that. Is that where the market seems to be leading?
Absolutely. You obviously can start from scratch, and technically it's pretty easy to do so in that respect, but you're going to have more success if you need to make sure you already have an audience. And if you already have a business, you already have a customer base or an audience that are listening to you and you're communicating with. So yeah, I think it's an obvious, an easy fit for established businesses.
Yeah, so if you've got something going already,
yeah,
it's almost like a missing piece of the jigsaw if you're not doing it.
It's not to be used to plug your products or services. It's not I guess if you were to run an e-commerce store and you sell products, it's not to be used like that. It's a highlight of, we got these new trainers in stock, etc. You have to be adding something of value, an opinion or some content that they can't get elsewhere. So I think one of the examples I gave yesterday was digital downloads. If you're a really good photographer, you could share your photos in an email newsletter and let people have access to use your photos. On a weekly basis, 10 new photos every week or fortnight or something.
So this is subscription, which means we must decide on a subscription term. Do you typically, would you say go monthly? Is that the easiest, least friction way to do it?
Yeah.
If you're sort of asking people to separate money from their wallet, monthly, annually?
I'd offer both a monthly option and then a yearly, maybe which is slightly discounted, because it's great. If you have people signed up for a year or they've committed to that year, that's excellent. But I'd always give people the option of monthly.
My fear of offering an annual plan would be that I'd just dry up. I'd be 8 months in and I'd be, I've got nothing else to say.
Yeah.
And then I've got to think about the sort of refund process.
Yeah. If you do that, you would probably have to refund people. But offering a yearly option is something you could consider after you've got into the groove of creating a newsletter and you think you can see it has a longer life to it.
Yeah, I know what we've been talking about is a WordPress thing. The piece that you described, the Mail Poet and the WooCommerce bit, is the way to get paid for that. Just briefly talking about alternative ways of doing that. The sponsorship bit or the payment bit outside of WordPress, there's things like Patreon and Ko-fi. Is that an angle you've ever looked at or explored?
Yeah, and Substack, they're all really great platforms to use, but they're outside of WordPress. So I think the kind of unique angle here or for this approach is if you want everything to be all in one place, if you're already creating content in WordPress, don't spend your time copying and pasting it over to a different piece of software. You can have it all in one dashboard, basically. Ownership is a big part of that.
Thorny question.
Mm-hmm.
Where are the email addresses stored?
Right. So in Mail Poet, no one else can see your subscribers' email addresses. Mail Poet takes email best practices and security very seriously. We don't even see the emails that get sent out via Mail Poet. So they're stored on, I think it's your server. They belong with you. Mm-hmm. They don't come to MailPo at any point. They are yours.
That's an interesting thing. And I guess you would need to be mindful of GDPR if you are storing people's email addresses. Do you have any insight into whether those are in the database? Do you know whether they're in an encrypted form or not?
This is a technical question that I am not able to answer, I'm afraid, at least not confidently. I think I know the answer, but I absolutely wouldn't want to go on a podcast and tell everybody the wrong thing, if that's okay.
That's okay. We could look at that another time. And so have you got any good examples of newsletters where you could say, go and have a look at that one? 2 or 3 that you think are really worthwhile, where somebody's done it just right. They're doing really well.
So the first one's called Dense Discovery. None of these examples are actually of paid. Well, actually, I can give some paid newsletter examples. Let me start with Dense Discovery, which you can pay for, but they handle the payment a slightly different way. It's more like a tip-based system. Like if you enjoy this, become a friend of the newsletter. But from a content perspective, I would pay to receive Dense Discovery. If they offered it up as a subscription, I would do that because I tip on a regular basis. It has a really good balance of the guy who's created the newsletter called Kai, like his opinion and his take on what's happening in the world. There are some lovely resources for like design. He often shares like an illustrator in their work, as well as some like handy tools for like productivity at work. So it's kind of like a nice blend of content, and it's really regular. I know when I'm going to receive it. It's the same time each week. And I know the quality of the content is going to be really, really good.
Can I just pause you there and just go on a bit of a segue, and we'll come back to some other ones in a minute, because that just suddenly occurred to me. There's something a bit meta going on there, because he's not asking for a subscription. But what if you had an email newsletter which was the sort of upsell for the paid newsletter?
Oh, yeah.
If you know what I mean. So the newsletter itself contains a proportion of the content. Is that a thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the next example I was going to give, I'd like to add a disclaimer. This isn't of my interest, but I can see it's done really, really well, which is why I'm going to mention it. It's called Daily Coding Problem. So it uses this paid newsletter technique really interestingly. It's basically they send like a coding problem. It's designed to help programmers prepare for technical interviews. And if you're only a free subscriber, you don't get to see the answer.
Oh. That is intriguing. Yeah, that's kind of like using the annoyance style, isn't it? Yeah.
So, I mean, if you're really confident with these, maybe you don't need to see them. You like the mystery. Yeah, you have to become a paid subscriber to see the solution.
That's fascinating. So throw something out there. It's a bit like if Wordle didn't give you the answer.
I know. How annoying would that be?
Well, you'd pay.
Yeah.
And then you'd get the answer every single day. Yeah, that's fascinating. So, I mean, that's really unique, isn't it? But presumably most of it is about just the kind of stuff that you would ordinarily put on your website. You just make sure that the content's really good, but you indicate they've got to the end of this newsletter, but there's more. You could find out more. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And like another example, which I mentioned yesterday, actually, was Jack's Flight Club.
Oh,
do you know? Yeah,
I pay for Jack's Flight Club.
Well, there you go. You're a paid newsletter subscriber.
That's fascinating. I hadn't connected. I use the app.
Yeah.
But it is a newsletter, and he got me through the newsletter. You're right. Go on. Tell them about Jack's Flight Club.
Yeah. So Jack's Flight Club, as we just heard, it's a really popular one in the UK and Europe, and it sends you like airfares and cheap flight deals. But if you're not a paid subscriber, you don't get all of the deals. And when you get the free version of the email, they tell you which deals that you missed. So it really plays on the like FOMO, like, you've missed these incredibly cheap flights to Canada. You didn't get that because you're not a paid subscriber.
That's right. And the interesting thing about that one is that's kind of opened my eyes up actually about where the price points may be. And maybe Jack is different. But it's about, if I recall, I think I paid about $40, something like that per year.
Yeah.
So it was not really a lot. If you spread that over it's like $3.80 or something a month.
Yeah.
That's really not a significant amount. But presumably if Jack, I'm guessing there is a Jack, I don't know. But presumably if Jack's into the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, this is a million. A million.
He's got 1 million subscribers,
okay.
1 million plus, yeah.
We can work the maths out there. Okay, Jack's doing well from newsletters.
Jack's doing all right. Well, it's the success of the newsletter that enabled him to take it to an app and, grow this beyond just email content.
I want to be Jack.
Yeah, me too. I bet he's on a yacht somewhere lovely right now. He's not looking up cheap flights,
He's no longer looking up cheap flights. But that really illustrates it perfectly. So it was something, most people probably don't care about flights at all. They'll just look for the flight when they're going on holiday. But here's me. I'm intrigued. I want to see if there is a cheap deal out there. So it's got me on that niche thing, like the coding chap.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long it took me. I think he was probably giving me the free one for 6 months.
Yep.
Do you know what he also did, which was curious, which was actually the hook? He offered a 20% discount in one of his emails.
Yeah.
So that's another interesting pricing strategy. He had his annual price, and then he, for a week only, I think it was 20% off.
Yeah.
And that was the fishing rod that I happily bit on. and I think he's got me for years to come.
Yeah, you can do that with this. And I'd recommend exploring things like that. Just jumping back to your question earlier about how to get paid subscribers. If you already run a successful newsletter, you can drop in the bit about you having a paid newsletter too. Give them a little taster of what they miss or what they will miss if they don't pay to subscribe. And yeah, it got you.
It works.
It does work.
And interestingly enough, I am pretty difficult to get. And yet he got me. So it is about the niche, I think.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the actual email itself. So we open up the email. Are there any sort of top tips about the way you should present things? I mean, are we looking for bright and colourful? Are we looking for more words than images? Are there tripwires that prevent the email clients from opening things because there's just way too much text and it truncates it? Just give us what the email actually should be looking like.
Well, I mean, it does completely depend like what you're including in it. I wouldn't be, if you're selling a like long form content style email, don't be afraid of including lots of words because that's what people are paying for. But in terms of spam filters, if you're offering a paid newsletter subscription, I don't think you'd have any issues because it's usually things like the word free and like capital letters, lots of exclamation marks.
Emojis in the subject line, yeah.
Emojis in the subject line are okay as long as they're not overused.
Okay.
Yeah. Basically, emails like don't overdo anything.
Okay.
A good combination of different things that works well. In terms of layout, I mean, just take a step back and think about what you'd like to read. If it's a big wall of text, would that entice you to read it? I mean, some people maybe, but no. So, and you can format the newsletter to look how you want. So you could add spaces, you can add some images, you can use columns if that's better for your content. So
the last time I was fiddling with email, I think we're still stuck in tables. Are there big constraints still about the way that you can present things? So obviously on the web, our own WordPress websites, we can literally put anything anywhere, pixel by pixel, more or less. Are we confined with email still? I mean, are we still thinking about email clients from the year 2004 as a thing?
Well, I mean, email's tricky because it will look different according to different email clients, and Outlook is forever a bugbear for those who create emails. But if you're using email marketing software, I mean, I can only speak to MailPoet, and I'm not just trying to plug here. It's just the one I'm most familiar with. Their templates are already fully responsive. Their templates are tested on all the different email clients. So you could kind of be pretty confident that unless you've gone in and really messed with that, they're going to work in most email clients. Litmus is a great tool if you're not sure. Email on Acid to test your emails to see what they're going to look like on Outlook, on Gmail, all the big email.
And how do they work? You send email on Acid, an actual email, and it then tells you, it gives you a rating or things to improve and so
it
on.
will show you how they look across the different email clients.
Tell us about the actual UI, about how you build email. I've logged into all sorts of services. Typically there's a bunch of modules, for want of a better word, a bit like in Gutenberg with blocks now. So you drag in an image, and you could drag in a couple of columns and put the image to the left and the text to the right. Is it what you see is what you get kind of builder?
It is. Yep. Yeah, it is a WYSIWYG builder. It doesn't use Gutenberg, but I know the MailPoet team are looking to explore that option. But the email itself is a WYSIWYG editor where you drag and drop.
So it's familiar. You'll be right at home. Yeah.
I don't like describing things as easy because I think different people have different perceptions of what's easy. But this is the easiest email editor that I've ever used because it is simply you drag it and you drop it where you want it.
Do you get an opportunity to inspect it before you commit?
Yep.
So it will send you a version you can inspect, make sure the links are all working and so on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And does it check that stuff as well? So in other words, it will see that, for example, you've overused images, Nathan, stop with the images of volcanoes, or that there's too much text typically. Does it give you any metrics about, what is that called even? Because I've seen that before. They do some sort of test in the background and give you a rating.
Like a readability?
Something along those lines, yeah.
It doesn't, no. I think because the way MailPoet's built and we don't see your email content.
That's interesting because it's your WordPress site, so it's your email. So it's not phoning home to any third parties.
It's not, but that's a pretty interesting idea. Maybe I'll pass it on to the team.
Oh, okay.
That would be useful.
Can I take credit for that?
The feature will be called Email Readability by Nathan.
That's great. Okay, I'm happy with that. So, Laura, just before we wrap up, where's the best place to find out about, well, in this case, MailPoet? Where do we go?
Mailpoet.com. If you head to the blog, there's some really great articles there about email marketing in general, how to build your list. There's even a blog post about creating a paid newsletter, like what my talk was on yesterday. Fantastic resource for all things email marketing.
Well, Laura, well done for getting through your talk at WordCamp Europe.
Thank you. Thank you.
A nice relief, and very happy to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.